based on that montage and following Viscerafest, I think I'm in a full-on boom shoot mood this week. And with last week's release of Wizardom, I'm going to be busy for a while. Anyway, this week we're going to be looking at the Quake-inspired Slavic tin shooter, HROT, by solo developer Spitznyev. God, I hope I'm pronouncing that one correctly. It was originally released in 2023 out of early access, but I could not get to it because it was a year full of amazing releases every few weeks. And in a year where Turbo Overkill, Hi-Fi Rush, and Baldur's Gate 3 were setting the world on fire, you can understand why the idea of picking and choosing had to come into effect. So this week, I'm going to be talking about HROT, and how its smaller nature is something that works to its advantage. But before we begin, I need to get the housekeeping out of the way. Be sure to do the usual like, comment, and subscribe things if you haven't already. And with that out of the way, let's begin, comrades. The first thing that really stuck out to me about HROT is that HROT is weird. HROT is really, really weird. This is because HROT was developed in its own proprietary engine in Pascal, no less. It's part of what lends the game its energy. And what energy is that? Slavjank energy, folks. This is the most Slavjank feeling video game to not be outwardly and legitimately being Slavjank, if that makes any sense. It does a lot, and I mean a lot of stuff in HROT that contributes to this, like the early-looking PC 3D graphics, the copious amounts of brown, the number of sewers being so high that Civ 11's sewer counter would need to be temporarily retired, the oddball enemy designs, etc., etc. These all contribute to a game that has an incredibly disquieting feeling from just about every single facet of its design. The basic narrative hook for HROT is that you are a member of a Czechoslovakian volunteer civic defense group, having woken up in a bunker following an undisclosed nuclear accident in 1986, which, while never fully disclosed, is pretty heavily implied to be the accident that destroyed Chernobyl. Upon seeing that the city of Prague has been overrun with an enemy force and weird creatures all wearing gas masks, you take up arms in glorious defense of the state. While that sounds like a compelling narrative hook, it's mostly an excuse to shoot gas mask-wearing mooks in the face with an ever-expanding arsenal of weapons. And that's perfectly fine with me because I could tell from the end of the first episode onwards that the premises of each of the levels and the enemies I was fighting was going to be absolutely absurd. And while all of those are interesting, they need to be talked about in depth with the gameplay. HROT is structured like many of the boomer shooters inspired by Doom, Quake, and their contemporaries. You've got 3 episodes with 8 levels apiece. The thing that I noticed is that there's another game that I've never played that HROT takes inspiration from, and that's Chasm the Rift. Chasm is a first-person shooter released in October of 1997 that, from what I've seen in videos and reading, was doing quite a bit of ambitious stuff with the environments and interactivity. And this was a few months before Quake 1, and almost a year before the original Half-Life. It was also developed by a small studio based out of Kiev, Ukraine, called Action Forms. And this is partially where the Slavjank weirdness that HROT has comes from. Because a few levels in, this happens. Yeah, that's the kind of weirdness I'm talking about. We got inanimate objects as bosses, giant spiders, grenadiers that are incessantly oinking like pigs, gas mask wearing horses. They got horses in gas masks like they're part of the Death Corps of Krieg from 40K. Sorry about that. It's just that most games try to keep things a bit normal so that they can do the weird stuff to see if people vibe. Part of what makes it so surreal is that you're often fighting these things alongside regular gas mask wearing mooks, teleporting variants of those same default mooks, and shotgunners in full hazmat suits. And the stuff in later episodes, from what I've seen in episode 2, only gets more weird from there. And this extends to combat encounters. HROT uses the well-worn setup of different enemies for a different tactical approach that was perfected in Doom and Doom 2. And the custom engine helps with this because there are times where I'm looking for switches to open doors while fighting enemies that also act as triggers for more enemies to spawn in and walls lowering to reveal enemies while getting through a specific event, like unlocking a door or grabbing a key. And while these are old tactics, HROT can be kind of a huge jerk about it at times, at least on normal. Yeah, that's just evil. But this is where the arsenal comes into play. You start off with a pistol and a sickle, but the first level gives you some more weapons pretty quickly, like a decent shotgun for a workhorse, an SMG I really like as a last resort option, and some grenades that I didn't know you could throw by using the right mouse button until the end of episode 1. Silly me. And those are all in the first level if you do some secret hunting. You also get a handheld grenade launcher called the Hussite hand cannon that uses said grenades as ammo, making it really useful for stronger enemies and bosses. The obligatory super shotgun that tears through everything, landmines for setting up traps that I used to kill the final boss of episode 1, a pretty good crossbow for sniping, and a Soviet version of Quake's lightning gun that uses car batteries for ammo. I held on to this for the harder fights because it's like the Riveter in Dusk. You can only find it in secrets to my knowledge because I can't find it any other way. And it's also absurdly powerful. It's a pretty good set of guns for fighting off whatever HROT throws at you, despite the fact that some weapons are clearly favored over others. Oh hi, shotguns. The arsenal definitely skews more towards Quake than Doom, which tracks because Quake is the main inspiration. They do their designed roles admirably. If there's one thing I can appreciate is that there's a sense of escalation in the episodes. In episode 1, you got a lot of the smaller weapons first, and eventually got the full arsenal. In episode 2, they practically chuck the super shotgun and crossbow at you, which feels like HROT's way of telling you to buckle up because they throw increasingly tougher enemies at you. Hell, they even throw Indiana Jones-style boulder traps at you that will chase you until you either die or climb up a ladder. And this is on top of the levels themselves getting more intricate, like this mine that requires the use of minecarts to get through. One thing that's a blessing and a curse for me, however, is the level design. As with Viscera Fest last week, HROT has these big, open levels that are straight up like mazes at times. So much so that there's a map that I had constantly pulled up to make use of so I didn't get lost. But unfortunately, I did end up getting lost. A lot, in fact. I was getting a tad frustrated at times. It also doesn't help that one of the main mechanics to progress is shooting out vents or fuse boxes. And I'm so used to those not being interactable that when I shoot them out to progress, I feel equal parts smart and like a fool for not trying sooner. What I'm saying is that I'm the clown that yellow paint was made for. The levels do lend themselves well to hiding secrets and rewarding secret hunting because there's usually around 5 to 6 of the suckers in a given level. While I will admit that HROT is a bit slower paced compared to the indie shooters I do like a lot, like Viscera Fest and Ultra Kill, it does a damn good job of doing what it sets out to do mechanically. Which is to say, a Quake-inspired shooter that can catch you off guard if you aren't careful. HROT was, as I mentioned way back at the start of the video, made by one guy by the name of Slavjank, in a proprietary engine, no less. And while I'm not wild about how brown it is, it's a part of the overall aesthetic vision that HROT's going for, and that is of a disquieting and bleak look at a late-era Soviet satellite state. And I must say, it does a bang-up job of showing that off. The city of Prague in episode 1, and the castle and countryside surrounding it in episode 2, look incredible in their bleakness. There's state propaganda all over the place. The interior of the titular mausoleum at the end of episode 1 has the leader's body shown in the same way as Mao Zedong and Vladimir Lenin were in their respective states, as glorious leaders to be venerated in death. The humanoid enemies all have just enough off about them to make them evoke the uncanny valley. Their proportions are all off, and there are times when you see them vomiting through their gas masks, implying that they may have some form of radiation sickness. This combined with the Geiger counters going off in the background, and there being primarily ambient noise in place of music outside of combat, and you've got an atmosphere that's incredibly creepy. This creepiness is where the emulation of Slavjank comes into play. There's just enough in there to make it feel off without actually making it feel off mechanically. It's the atmosphere. It's the vibes. It also uses this to its advantage by jump scaring the heck out of you because I can legit count the number of times I jumped out of my chair. It's really good on that front. HROT is a pretty good throwback that does what it sets out to do admirably. The incredibly creepy and weird atmosphere, the solid gunplay, and the wonderfully messed up enemies are more than enough for me to see past its somewhat confusing level design and slightly jerkish encounters. If you have time for something Slavic, HROT's got you covered, comrade.